Three-legged bobcat and blind fox become best friends. Their story went viral. It was a quiet morning in the Cascades when Ellie Grant first saw them, two animals that didn't belong together, yet were somehow inseparable. Ellie, a wildlife photographer with a love for the untamed beauty of the forest, had been setting up her camera equipment by the creek when the unlikely duo appeared from the thicket. The bobcat came first, moving with a calculated grace despite the obvious handicap. She was missing her front left leg, a ragged stump where once there had been muscle and bone. Her movements were slow, but there was no weakness in the way she walked, only strength that came from surviving the harshest elements. The second animal to emerge from the underbrush was a fox, a small creature, with fur that looked like it had been brushed in the softest shades of red and gold. But it wasn't the fox's appearance that caught Ellie's attention. It was the way it moved, hesitant. Its eyes, normally so sharp and perceptive, were completely clouded over. Blind. Ellie froze, her breath catching in her throat. This was a sight she never expected to witness. A bobcat, fierce and solitary, by nature, moving alongside a blind fox as though it were the most natural thing in the world. They circled the creek together, the bobcat walking a few steps ahead, always checking back on the fox, making sure it was close. The fox in return followed the bobcat's every movement, relying on the sound of the bobcat's paws and the rhythm of her steps. Ellie's mind raced. How had they come to be together? The wilderness was unforgiving, especially for creatures who were already struggling. Yet here they were, two survivors, bound by an unspoken bond. It didn't make sense, but the connection between them was undeniable. For hours, Ellie watched them. The bobcat would pause occasionally, waiting for the fox to catch up before moving forward again. The fox in turn would nudge its companion with its snout, a silent gesture of affection and trust. It was clear that the bobcat, despite her injury, had taken on the role of protector. The fox, with its blindness, had no choice but to rely on the bobcat's guidance. And in that moment, Ellie understood. This wasn't just a survival story, it was something deeper, something rare. A bond forged not by the need to survive, but by the will to care for another. As the days passed, Ellie returned to the creek time and again, her camera in hand, captivated by the extraordinary connection between the three-legged bobcat and the blind fox. It wasn't just the physical bond that fascinated her. It was the quiet understanding between the two animals, a trust that ran deeper than survival alone. The bobcat, whom Ellie had started calling Savannah, had proven to be more than just a solitary predator. Despite her missing leg, Savannah moved. With the same calculated precision she would have with all four limbs, she hunted in silence, crouching low to the ground, her amber eyes focused on a rabbit or a squirrel, her tail twitching with anticipation. The fox, Milo, would wait a safe distance away, sitting motionless, ears perked, listening for any sign of movement. Savannah would strike quickly, and then, with surprising gentleness, she would bring the prey to Milo, who would nudge it cautiously, sniffing at it, but unable to see it. Ellie couldn't believe the unspoken teamwork between the two. It was a dance, a delicate balance of give and take, where the bobcat gave of herself, her strength, her sharp instincts, and the fox, in turn, gave her trust, allowing Savannah to lead her through the wild. What was most remarkable to Ellie was the complete absence of hesitation. Savannah didn't treat Milo as a burden. She didn't shy away from guiding him, even when it meant slowing down or taking longer to make sure he could keep up. And Milo? He trusted Savannah with a loyalty that went beyond reason. He didn't flinch when she nudged him to move forward, even if he couldn't see where they were going. He followed her, completely dependent on her sense of direction. The animals were so attuned to each other's movements that it seemed almost as if they were one. Ellie watched as Savannah would stop and wait, glancing over her shoulder to ensure that Milo was still following. When he stumbled, as foxes do in unfamiliar terrain, Savannah would nudge him back onto the path, and Milo, despite his blindness, would continue forward, a sense of purpose in his every step. Over time, Ellie's fascination with their bond turned into something deeper. She began documenting their relationship, capturing photos of their quiet moments together, the way Savannah lay on the rocks, eyes half closed, while Milo curled up beside her, content and trusting. It was the kind of connection that spoke volumes without a single word, the kind that could only be understood through the lens of patience, care, and shared experience. The forest, in all its harshness, had shown Ellie something beautiful, that even in the wildest corners of the world, Even with the cruelest challenges, there could be a place for kindness. And in the unlikeliest of pairs, she found proof that love could take many forms, that survival didn't always have to be about the strongest or the most capable, but about something far more enduring, a bond that transcended everything else. As weeks turned into months, Ellie's bond with Savannah and Milo grew. Her photographs, now filled with intimate moments of the duo, the Bobcat's watchful eyes, the fox's trusting stance, began to accumulate on her social media. At first, it was just a few friends sharing her posts, commenting on how incredible the pictures were, but soon, word began to spread. People were captivated by the unlikeliest of friendships, a three-legged bobcat and a blind fox, living in the wilderness, relying on each other to survive. One afternoon, while Lena was out photographing the two, she received a message that would change everything. A wildlife blog had shared her images, calling them a testament to the power of unlikely bonds. The post went viral. The images were shared hundreds of thousands of times, spread across news outlets, social media, and nature-focused websites. People couldn't get enough of Savannah and Milo. Their story was too powerful to ignore. Lena's phone blew up with messages. People from all over the world, inspired by the resilience and compassion the animals showed toward each other, wanted to know more. They wanted updates on how the pair was doing. They wanted to donate to wildlife foundations. Some even inquired about visiting the area, wanting to catch a glimpse of the duo that had touched so many hearts. But for Lena, it was the comments that truly made an impact. One message from a woman in New York said, "If they can survive and thrive despite the odds, maybe there's hope for all of us." Another read, "This story has restored my faith in the kindness that still exists in the world." For Lena, this was the turning point. The story of Savannah and Milo had become more than just an interesting wildlife encounter. It had become a movement. People saw their bond as a symbol of what was possible, that even in a world where survival was a constant struggle, kindness and trust could still be the foundation for life. But for Savannah and Milo, nothing had changed. They continued their quiet existence in the woods, unaware of the attention they had garnered. Each morning, Savannah would lead Milo to the creek, where they would drink from the cool waters before venturing deeper into the forest. Together, they hunted, played, and rested. Two souls entwined in a way that was beyond anything that could be captured with a camera or shared on a screen. Ellie found herself torn between her desire to protect their privacy and the pressure to share their story. She knew that the world needed more stories like theirs, ones filled with hope, love, and compassion. But she also understood that Savannah and Milo were wild animals, and their space in the forest was sacred. Still, as the story of the three-legged bobcat and blind fox spread, Ellie couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. In a time when so much of the world felt divided, their bond had become a beacon of unity. It had restored something deep inside people, reminding them of the goodness that could be found in even the most unlikely places. As the seasons changed, so did the world around Savannah and Milo. The summer days turned to fall, and the forest began to shift with the golden hues of autumn. Ellie continued to document their lives, capturing fleeting moments of this beautiful, unlikely bond. Despite the growing attention, Savannah and Milo lived as they always had, in quiet solitude, moving through the forest with a grace that seemed to defy the odds. But there were challenges. As winter approached, the temperatures dropped, and food became harder to find. Savannah, despite her missing leg, was still an expert hunter, but even she couldn't always provide enough for both herself and Milo. The blindness of the fox made hunting difficult for him, and Ellie began to notice how much more dependent he had become on Savannah, not just for protection, but for sustenance. One afternoon, Ellie watched as Savannah caught a rabbit, a rare, skillful kill that left the bobcat panting from the effort. She carried it back to where Milo was waiting, his nose twitching with anticipation. But as Savannah reached him, she collapsed on the ground, exhaustion catching up with her. It was clear that the weight of the winter was beginning to take its toll. Milo, his usual hesitant self, stepped forward, sniffing at the rabbit. His blind eyes seemed to catch the scent of it, and for a moment Ellie saw something different in him, a spark of determination. Milo nudged the rabbit closer to Savannah, then began to tear at the meat, his small body working with a newfound urgency. It wasn't much, but it was something. Savannah had always been the protector, the leader, but in that moment Milo stepped up. He had learned, just as Savannah had, how to survive in this harsh world. Ellie's heart swelled as she watched them. It wasn't just the fact that they had survived so far. It was how they had learned from each other. They had forged a relationship that transcended the struggles they faced. Where one was weak, the other was strong. And where one was blind to the world, the other guided with the wisdom of experience. In a world that often seemed filled with division and despair, Savannah and Milo had found a way to thrive together, relying on each other not just for survival, but for love. They had taught Ellie something she hadn't expected, that the deepest bonds were often the ones that didn't rely on perfection, but on trust, patience, and the willingness to give when it seemed like there was nothing left. By the time winter settled fully in, the forest was blanketed in snow, and Ellie noticed a subtle change in Savannah and Milo. The cold had made them more resourceful, more dependent on each other, and perhaps even more protective of their quiet world. It was clear they had become more than just companions. They were family. Ellie kept her distance, respecting their space, but she knew that her role in this story had changed. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She was a witness to something profound, a testament to the resilience of nature, the strength of friendship, and the power of love. Savannah and Milo, in their own quiet way, had become legends, not just in the forest, but in the hearts of people around the world. Their story had gone viral, yes, but it had also ignited something much deeper, a reminder of the incredible power of connection, even when the world seemed divided. And in the silence of the Cascades, surrounded by the deep falling snow, Ellie knew that this unlikely pair had changed more than just her life. They had changed the way the world saw the power of love in the wild. Spring came once again, and with it, a sense of renewal. The harshness of winter had given way to soft rains and the steady return of green. The forest, which had seemed quiet and still under the weight of snow, was now alive with movement. New buds appeared on the trees, and wildflowers began to dot the forest floor, painting the earth with hues of violet, yellow, and blue. Ellie stood on the edge of the creek, watching the water flow swiftly around the rocks, her camera tucked under her arm. She had come to this spot many times over the past year, hoping to catch another glimpse of Savannah and Milo. The duo, despite the increased attention, had remained elusive, as wild creatures should. Ellie had respected their space, not wanting to disturb the fragile balance that had formed between them. But today felt different. The air was warmer, and the forest felt alive in a way that made Ellie believe she might just see them again. She'd followed their story through the seasons, capturing the quiet strength they exuded, and today, as she waited by the creek, it felt as though nature was giving her one last gift. As if on cue, she heard the soft crunch of leaves behind her. She turned slowly, not wanting to startle them, and there they were, Savannah and Milo moving through the trees, their steps synchronized as always. Savannah, still with her one leg, led the way, her movements as graceful as ever. Milo, the blind fox, followed close behind, his sharp nose guiding him through the familiar terrain. The bond between them was evident in the way they moved together, in the way they trusted one another without hesitation. But today, something had changed. Milo, who had once relied completely on Savannah for guidance, was moving with more confidence. He no longer followed her every step, but walked beside her, his movements surer, his head held high. Savannah, for the first time, seemed to be relying on Milo just as much as he relied on her. She would occasionally glance back at him, waiting for him to catch up, and when he did, she would nudge him with her head, her eyes soft with affection. Ellie watched in awe. This was no longer just a story of survival. This was a story of growth, of two animals learning from each other, of finding strength in the places they thought were weakest. Milo had learned to navigate the world without sight, and Savannah, despite her injury, had taught him the value of trust and patience. They were no longer the same creatures that had first met at the creek. They had evolved just as nature always intended. As they neared Ellie, Savannah paused, her amber eyes locking with the photographer's. There was no fear, no hesitation. It was as though she recognized Ellie as part of the forest, a silent observer who had watched their story unfold. Milo stood beside her, his ears twitching as he sniffed the air, his trust in Savannah unwavering. Ellie held her breath as she lowered her camera. For a moment, the world stood still. There was no rush, no need to capture anything in that moment. It was enough to simply watch. The two animals, bound by an unbreakable bond, slowly turned and moved back toward the forest. They didn't look back, but Ellie knew they were okay. They had made it, together, and as they disappeared into the trees, Ellie whispered softly, "You two are something else." The story of the three-legged bobcat and the blind fox had not only gone viral, it had become a symbol, a reminder that in the wild, in the most unlikely of places, love and friendship could blossom even in the face of adversity. Savannah and Milo had shown the world that nature wasn't just about survival. It was about connection, about growth, and about finding strength in the most unexpected places. Their story had touched hearts across the globe, inspiring others to see the beauty in the bonds that formed, even when the world seemed broken. And in the silence of the Cascades, as Ellie stood by the creek and watched the last remnants of the pair fade into the wild, she knew that their story would live on, not just in the photographs she had captured, but in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed their extraordinary friendship.